What does winning in investing look like?
Well, I would ask you, when you think about your young investing career to date, what are the things that you can point to where you're like, I am proud of that like feels and sounds and tastes like victory?
That's such a good question, eh? I think, well, obviously growth, right? Like as a percentage figure, as a figure of numbers on the screen of the app, seeing that increase feels really good. That feels like winning. I think what feels just as good as that as well, though, is like defining a strategy through all the conversations we've had to get to a stage where I feel like I know what I'm doing, rather than just dropping someone some money and just hoping that it goes up. I feel like, in a weird way, I feel like whether it's going up or whether it's going down, just based on the amount of time we've spent together, that I'm still winning either way.
Yeah, so if I'm hearing you right, there is financial wins are nice, like both for the money part and for the just feeling like you're winning a game part, but then you also have the psychological wins. And usually the financial wins are lagging indicators of the psychological wins, because generally speaking, you need to arrive at clarity and informed optimism and confidence before action would become possible, and certainly before sustained action would be possible, and then winning would be possible. And yeah, for me, that is in the context of like the Fine Fat Fishes swim school 8-week workshop. People are like, well, like, what can you guarantee? This sounds like it's too good to be true, etc. It's like, can't promise the kind of like financial results that other people have gotten. One of the very few things that you can definitely guarantee is that it's going to be work. But on the other side of committing yourself to a system that works, be it Fatfish or something else, as long as it's been proven and duplicatable, you can achieve absolutely transformative psychological wins in a tight time frame, at the end of which it feels like the writing is on the wall that the financial wins will happen. And that is a lot of the time, the most satisfying pieces, both for me and for people around me, essentially have nothing to do with money. It has to do with like the successful vanquishing of fear or confusion or some kind of pain.
Yeah, which, tying it back to episode 1, was a massive psychological shift for me off the rip, because I always thought, since getting to know you, it was about a figure in the bank, but it's so much more than that. Like you said, you checked me, I just watched it the other day. You think about things more in terms of freedom, like what the money can do, rather than the amount of money, or like comparing money to what someone else has got. It's like what it can do for you in real life. Like the financial figure is just a figure in the bank. Like if you're defining how you feel based on that, that's a numbers game, but the real world matters just as much, which is something that I think was massive for me. But yeah, on that whole point of the psychological adjustments and what you said about lagging indicators, I think that's something that has really set into me as a perspective around winning. Winning's more about how you think than about the result.
I completely agree. I mean, you're also an entrepreneur and a mixed martial arts coach. So you tell me, I mean, which comes first, the winning thought or the winning performance?
Yeah. They say champions are made in gyms, and I'm a firm believer of that.
Yeah. Well, to me, it's like you, in a lot of ways, I mean, in some ways it's apples to apples, in some ways it's apples to oranges. But for me, a huge part of this system of investing is you front load the work so that you can intelligently do what feels like nothing, but it's almost nothing. And a huge piece of that is you do enough work to, as they say, like win the war before it's been fought. And then you don't have to trouble yourself when the war is actually being fought, because you know that you've done everything in your power. Probability is on your side. Math and time are on your team. And when you're operating from that perch, it is much more difficult to do something that is, among other things, like self-destructive or self-defeating. And so, yeah, I agree. I mean, what these things have in common, I think, is that you want to do the work where you dial in a method of thinking, a method of acting, a method of sustained action, where you know that volatility and risk and these things are going to be in the arena, but you also know that the war, in all probability, has been won before it's been fought. And if that's what you've done, then you've got the psychological wins, and then the financial wins, provided that your system is on point, are very, very likely to follow. And ultimately, I think that that's what confidence really is self-assurance that you'll be able to deal with long-term uncertainty, regardless of what the winds of the world throw at you, and then the fact that it will never be easy or in like a 168-hour window, like predictable.
Yeah. One of the interesting contrasts that I think about, I've paid attention to a lot of different fighters' careers over the years, like being involved with fighting, and the best fighters, they do have a long-term view, defensive responsibility, thinking about their brain, thinking about their health. It all plays into your ability to think into the ring, in the ring. And I just think so many fighters can be short-sighted, and likewise with so many investors. It's one of the common themes that I noticed throughout all of the episodes. Time, like forecasting, future pacing, your thoughts and actions is such a big factor. And I think it's probably one of the most understated parts of learning to invest so far for myself. Like, I used to just think about like, oh, when am I getting this or when am I getting that? You need to think way longer term than that. Like how soon. It's like you're more thinking about the company and what they stand to do over what period of time, rather than thinking about your personal goals first. It's like, oh, well, could this actually fulfill that? It's something that I noticed for me. It's like, it's not about when you want it. It's like when it's going to happen roughly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think, I mean, two things that came up that I scribbled down in terms of like, don't forget to do these things. One of them is don't forget to celebrate wins in all of their forms, as cliche and like Tony Robbins as that sounds, because I have had conversations with people who have, and counterintuitively, all of this can be the scariest when you're winning, when things are going according to plan. And as your like self-perception and self-attitude might be on the rise, your net worth is on the rise, and you're like, well, what do I make of this now? And so I've literally had a conversation with somebody who, it took about 36 months post our collaboration for him to like turn what he was doing into $1 million. And then during month 37, that next month, it then jumped to 2 million. So he made $1 million unrealized in a month, when 3 years and 1 month prior, he didn't have $1 million to his name. And it was fascinating talking to him about it, because he obviously was happy with the situation, but he was all kinds of shaky. And it has been interesting talking to people in all kinds of different contexts, where if you're not careful, you can be discussing your wins as if they're losses. And the whole thing continues to have this sort of like scary and hazy and negative cloud over it, even though you're winning. So don't forget to identify and document, preferably, all of the little micro victories along the way. In the context of what does winning look like in investing, I would say like the smaller but still really significant victories that happen that can be easy to overlook once you've done them is getting past your fear of numbers, getting past your fear of jargon, getting past your fear of like well-dressed tri-state area white guys telling you that you can't do this yourself, picking up a newspaper. I'm not sure if you know what a newspaper is, but or like reading a section on an online website that strikes you like hieroglyphics, like getting past that, getting past made to feel small. These are not small things. Getting past the extreme sort of decision paralysis that comes with all of the different ways that you could conceivably size up an investment and make an investment, getting past all of that and actually getting skin in the game in the first place, even if it's one share of one company, getting past your fear of panic selling in either direction, whether it comes up a little bit or drops down a little bit, actually getting a year of riding time so that you're making an actual long-term investment. All of these things are huge wins that are necessary precursors to being able to, retire on your terms, retire early, survive a post-retirement environment once you're done trading time and talent for money. Like, these are all things that have to be vanquished in advance, unless you marry a partner that you trust implicitly and completely give the reins to, and they don't screw up, and they don't screw you over, and they stay alive. Essentially, that's the only other way that you could avoid needing that. And so just celebrating all of that. Another thing is getting on the same page with your partner about the target that you're aiming at and what you're doing to get from A to B as quickly as possible without taking undue risk. Another one is not allowing your boss or your government to keep their foot on your neck because you know that you have a counter move. You're being able to let go of your financial advisor, or at least scrutinize their work if you wanted to. There are so many wins inside of I got 1,000% return that you should be proud of. And so it's important to be aware of them, not necessarily target them, but make your progress follow a system. But when they do happen, appreciate them. Don't let those memories sort of ossify to dust, and remember where you've come from. Otherwise, you could make $1 million unrealized in a month and shit your pants and sell everything and kind of completely abandon momentum and progress because you lost perspective of how far you'd really come. It kind of reminds me a little bit of all of the self-help community's discussion of identity. Is if you're not building your identity and your habits alongside your net worth, then you're headed for a system or a situation like a lottery winner who all of a sudden has an 8-figure net worth, but a 5-figure identity. And obviously you're going to collapse back down in that situation.
Yeah, you don't want to leave those things up to chance. One of the things that I hear through that, all those things are definitely wins for people that are getting started. And I've felt some of those wins along the way. Definitely haven't got $1 million in the bank or anything like that. But for yourself, being 20 years in, how do you feel when you win, and what does winning look like for you? Not necessarily figures wise, but just personally, psychologically.
That's an interesting question. So for me, I think I have gone so far down the quote unquote servant leader path that I've been mostly thinking in terms of the client wins. It's very good, and also entrepreneurship. So actually I haven't, I have to pause a moment to think about what that feels like for me as an investor. I think one is continuing to prioritize investing despite the jealous mistress of business and just self-development and life. That's one thing that's another thing. What winning looks like in investing is being able to have options and pursue options. And so sometimes what happens is someone will realize that they're really serious about using some of their gains, let's say, to start their own business. And then they're confronted with the choice of finite resources into infinite opportunity. And so for me, part of mine is just devoting time and money to continue cultivating this game alongside the other 15 games that I'm playing. Another is when you learn something new and you have not fallen into the whole trap of, because I've sort of documented my strategy and publicly committed to what I'm doing, that now I'm incapable of questioning assumptions and continuing to grow. So for me, recently, I conducted relatively recently, over the last 3 years, I've conducted a split test of a main portfolio doing a quite focused investing strategy against a side portfolio, which is still quite focused, but comparatively diversified. So exponentially more positions in this one than this one, but still by almost anyone's definition, very, very concentrated. And it's a celebration and at the same time, but the hybrid portfolio in a 3-year period has beaten the ultra focused, and both have beaten the S&P. So that's another thing that winning looks like. Oh, you can't beat the S&P. It's like, are you sure?
Yeah.
Are you sure about that? But basically, like, conducting a split test and having the results be successful, but not exactly according to plan, and then sort of recalibrating accordingly.
Yeah.
So giving yourself the benefit of experiments and lessons that help you continue to sort of recalibrate and like super spit polish what you're doing.
In that 3-year period, what would you say the biggest lessons that you've learned about unforeseen circumstances impact on your ability to invest?
I would say, one of the main things would be, I mean, there's a fair amount there.
Yeah.
Lots
happened, 3 years.
One is, so like the side pot portfolio was roughly 100K, and it's grown into roughly 250 to 280K depending on fluctuations lately. And obviously it could crane down, it could fly up, whatever, but you're talking about like a 2.5-fold increase over 2.75 years. And so like in looking at that and then studying that versus like my tried and true, like ultra concentrated, which has done well, but not that well. I look at that, and one thing is, don't get bogged down by sentiment or ego. So beware emotional factors, especially the ones that are like the closest to you and the most at home with you. And so one thing would be, for example, an issue with having a all the way concentrated or like all the way sentimental portfolio where like people that are, I love it when people say that they want to be ethical investors, but a problem with going over is that you then can't see the chessboard practically or pragmatically at all. And now you're overly attached. In either situation, be the attachment sort of egocentric, like this is the best, I'm the smartest, or this is the best and the most ethical, etc. Either way, it can cause you to root for the investment like a sports team rather than just one option in a sea of options that you could be putting your money. Because again, what a fat fish is an opportunity to take a month of expenses and position it to grow into a year of freedom in your investment time horizon with no realistic chance of that investment dropping to zero. And so ultimately, as they say, like what an entrepreneur is, what an investor is someone who's allocating resources in such a way that it has the highest yield. And I think you could add nuance to what that really should mean, but that's essentially what it means. And so the second that you lose almost like a scientific detachment to this, you're in trouble. Ego is the enemy and all that. And so, in doing that split test, and like part of what winning for me is getting like a fresh and novel experience that will make me better at running either of these, and about teaching people how to build something like this or something like this, and to be on the lookout for when sort of undue emotion runs the risk of self-sabotage. And so basically, just in a nutshell, making money with your money on autopilot. I mean, it's always nice when you have like a pretty deep into 6-figure profit when it literally took 15 minutes of pulling the trigger and then holding. So you're talking about that's a win. That's a nice win. But the bigger win is getting smarter and smarter and smarter, so that when you do that in the future, the odds of you getting a better return and not having any self-inflicted gunshot wounds inside of that victory goes up and up and up. So any opportunity to get smarter while making money, while exercising lazy intelligence is the thing.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I found when I was doing that deep dive on YouTube last week. I was doing that for a bit of market research, looking at expanding YouTube. And there was a lot of guys that I found that were directly tied to Buffett and Munger, be it through business acquaintances or just someone meeting them randomly. All of these guys had that same trait. And I don't know if stoicism is quite the right word, but it was just this level of calmness, that same calmness that you have, but it was this attitude. I think it's hard to put it down, but like they just had a different attitude about learning than maybe everyone else in the world. Like, they're just thinking way longer term, like 20, 30 years, just in their language. And it was hard to discern exactly why or where that came from. What do you think ties all of those people together, and where do you think the relevance is back to those particular individuals from Berkshire Hathaway?
Ooh, well, I don't know the individuals that you're referencing. But like, what are the things that successful investors have in common? I think a lot of the time it would just be the ability to zoom out, the ability to question assumptions. I mean, to me, essentially, like, I have this joke that I do at the end of every module in the workshop. Like, what would Joey Public do? And so, like, the average dumbass that is so frequently sort of made fun of or even reviled by philosophers, comedians, thinkers, etc. Like, what would Joey Public do, understanding that 20% or less of the people are going to make 80% of the money or more doing this? What is that 80% of people going to do that kind of shits the bed in a predictable, cyclical, monetizable way? And generally speaking, those mistakes are going to be taking the pendulum too far one way or too far the other way, or just oscillating from one side to the other. And so too much of anything or too little of anything. And so generally speaking, if you're making a mistake, you could be asking yourself, what would Joey Public do? How can I sort of bring myself, am I like overly extreme in some way? And can I do a little something? I want to maintain my personality. I don't want to be perfectly down the middle bland, but can I just bring myself a little bit closer to center so that I'm not shooting myself in the face? And so in the context of that, what I mean is, like, a great investor is going to have their own worldview, their own identity, their own way of doing things. They're probably going to be a little bit unique, a little bit willful, probably, but they're never going to be so far extreme that they're putting themselves in danger. And so one of the things would be, they'll be able to zoom out enough that they can see the entire forest or the entire ocean, but they're also capable of zooming in that they can actually pay some attention to details, the trees, the reef, and they can take action. So you need people that can both philosophize and take action. And if they miss something, if they miss an action, if they were too slow to take action, or if they were too fast and impetuous in taking action and they scalded themselves on some mistake, either way, they will, as Charlie Munger would say, rub their nose in the mistake so it doesn't happen twice, swing their own personal pendulum one way or the other, and make the adjustment. And so essentially, I mean, like, I guess in a sense, I'm not that conversant with Stoicism, but being philosophical to me in a lot of ways means understanding emotions without getting run over by your own. And so the ability to observe emotions rather than react to them, so that you can be patient and proactive rather than like impetuous and reactive, is probably one of the most important things. And that's one of the things that I'm thinking of, like, in the entire scope of the 3 years, which started roughly August 2022. That's when that holding period started. The only time that my emotions were poking at me, sell, and I could like feel part of me screaming about panic selling, like sell everything, get into cash, was right when Trump came into office and right when stocks were in free fall and they were sitting there. And so I felt like that poking at me, but I didn't act on it. And so that actually, if you look at stock charts for any company, for the general economy, that would have been the worst time to sell. So I observed it rather than reacted to it. And as we've discussed at certain points, and as I get into in week 8 of the workshop, the next level of that, if you were so inclined, would be to exploit it, where you observe it and then you either ignore it and you put it over there and you stay the course, or you kind of pull out the magnifying glass. What is Joey Public doing right now? And you exploit it. And so like I could have, and this is the like a mistake within the victory, arguably, is you could make exponentially more if you can identify those moments of maximum pessimism and get involved. However, if you're playing 15 entrepreneurial games as described, you might conclude that's not worth your time, and you might be right.
Yeah.
But either way, what makes that possible is being willing to do a significant amount of front-loaded research, take decisive action with a long-term time horizon, stay the course, and observe your emotions rather than get sort of like whipsawed or whipsawing yourself into panicky sort of self-destructive nonsense.
Yeah. As you were describing your personal emotional reaction to that drop during those periods of volatility, something that flashed through my head in accordance with that same demeanor that those guys have when I was watching them on YouTube, what flashed into my head was Sugar Sean, after he knocked out Aljamain Sterling, walking around the ring. The level of calmness that he had then, it's like he knew he was going to do something like that. That's the same level of calmness. And I think from a fighting context, it comes from an insane amount of reps to know that you're capable of something like that. Like I can't speak to investing front. I haven't dealt with like that kind of volatility to like really gulp and like not have faith that it's going to work out. But I'm sure when it happens, having come from that fighting background where, you know, like I have dealt with adversity, I have dealt with serious challenges, I have dealt with losses even, but I think rolling with the punches in any given circumstance can be a transferable skill. And that's something I think about.
For sure. But I think the first part of what you said resonated with me a lot, which is sort of pre-rehearsing victory.
Yeah. Is that something you do a lot?
Well, like I was saying, like don't forget to celebrate. Also, don't forget to define why you're doing this. And then to like, I'm from an entrepreneurial community where a huge like it's funny, like it's like it was former 4-star generals in the Tony Robbins army that supposedly were teaching like marketing and sales, but 99% of what was being discussed was mindset, psychology, energy, frequency, vibration, and so forth. And so one of the main things was visualizing victory and like building that vision daily. And there is a tipping point again with the pendulum where like that becomes mental masturbation, procrastination, stalling tactics. But if you don't do enough of that, God forbid something good happens, you perceive it as like a disaster or you like misread reality. And so one early piece of that I saw where I was like, oh, I think I do actually need to install more emotional work, more EQ building into Fine Fat Fish's swim school was the two first clients that I worked with, who then turned into two significant success stories, both late 20s, both got after it pretty fast, although they would always be kicking themselves that they should have taken action faster, but they got in the game and they got going, and they didn't know each other. They've never met each other. They both contacted me different years, but at the same threshold where it was, once my net worth crosses 500K, I'm selling everything. And I'm like, well, I was like, that makes a great deal of sense in the sense that that is exactly how you didn't get to this point. I was like, why would you liquidate it? And the answer has nothing to do with money or tactics and everything to do with identity. And I think it's along the lines of they didn't see themselves as like a millionaire for whatever that means. And so 500K, calling it, I fold, thank you very much. And so the adjustment needs to be doing that like Sugar Sean O'Malley work. And I am sure that he's got his coaches all over him, like visualizing being the best in the world champion. I would imagine anyone that climbs to that level in any field, especially that competitive and vicious, has to do that. Because if you haven't visualized yourself with $1 million in a brokerage account, even though to me, honestly, that feels really arbitrary. But if it is a psychological stumbling block that like my family, you know, we're humble, we're working class, we're immigrant family, like we bleed for our money. That's what we do. Like these things all sound like nice and noble, but they're massively in the way of like creating the next level for your family tree and the next level of winning. And yeah, ultimately the first solution to that is simply believing that it's possible and believing that if you were to take the right action and sustain it, it has nothing to do with you. It's just like logic and math and probability / inevitability. And if you don't do that, then yeah, whatever it is that is your probably unspoken, even to yourself, limit of who and what you are, once you hit it, you're likely to sell, hide it under your mattress and quit and stop, even though that makes no actual sense. That it, like logically, that has nothing to do with systemic cause and effect, but it has everything to do with psychological and like illogical cause and effect, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I think one of the things that I was thinking about that you often speak about with investor archetypes and why potentially they don't try and help people. One of the things that I found with it is the level of understanding of like human psychology, and rightly to exploit it if that's their prerogative, that's their goal as investors. Like it makes it challenging for them to kind of like go out of their way to help people because they're focused on like making lots of money. And with that, I don't believe that's inherently evil or anything like that. They're just playing this game, and that's cool. That's their thing. But one of the things I think about with that self-belief thing, I was having an interesting conversation with one of my clients just yesterday about that. And he was saying, and this is nuts and kind of proves what you just said, right? But he was saying his mum talks shit on him for investing.
On what grounds?
Saying that, like, you know, we're a working class family, we don't need to do that. And like, meanwhile, they're like having quite a hard time. Yeah. Financially.
That's what you call a good old fashioned self-imposed prison that you're then projecting onto your nearest and dearest, which is a pattern playing out all over the world. I mean,
it's mad, right? And like for like his family, you know, that's a real battle. But I don't think the people that are playing this game, like watching these YouTube videos of them speaking, I don't think that they had that family adversity. You know? Like,
well, exactly. That's why my dad's cruise ship experience is really important. But actually, for me, there was a conflict in my own home. My twin sister actually told me this because I never actually explicitly had this conversation. But my mom grew up in essentially like rural or semi-rural Minnesota, Rochester, Minnesota, and literally like knitting her own sweaters.
Crazy.
And she ended up, because she's very smart and assiduous, but there was like also like a lucky serendipitous moment that she just completely grabbed with both hands, and she got an opportunity to work at a New York law firm where she then became a partner, one of the first female lawyers at a New York law firm, etc. So she found herself in the like swinging dick Wall Street atmosphere, but like as somebody from Minnesota who, she told me this to me, like, put it in perspective like no other. Like, apparently when she was like 27 and she was working at this law firm, somebody came up to her and they were like, Jean, when we ask you to do something, we need you to say yes, not yeah. She was like, Fargo, like, yeah. And so essentially like so that was her frame of reference. And then she meets my dad, who had a completely different, like more like patrician upbringing. And apparently he would say to her sometimes, and he, in the same way that he helped mold me, he helped mold her into like making it work in that environment. Apparently something that he'd say to her, blunt as he was, would be like, Jean, you're thinking like a poor person. And that would be how he would like deliver the hammer blow to then explain the adjustment. And essentially what you're talking about is you're thinking about this in like a closed and scared and scarce way. This is how you think about it if you want to like open it up. And you can't go around being like, you're thinking like a poor person. At least I think you probably shouldn't, but that does cut to the crux of it. And that's one of the main things that, well, there's a lot of main things, but one of the psychological hurdles that when people can see it, you can then work with it. But if they won't own it, then it's gone. Is essentially like, I have a block that I can't even visualize what it is like to not have to like bleed out of my nose to make money. I need to grind for it. That's what I've always done. That's what I've always been taught. And so being able to let that go in pursuit of something that actually is more congruent with a life that you want to live, for at least in your next chapter. Again, that's part of what winning looks like, is discarding an identity that like saved you and got you where you are, but is no longer actually helping you become who you want to be for yourself and for other people. That is winning. That is the definition of like evolution and transformation. And so that is not small. In terms of the investor archetypes, there's many, many hours of discourse inside of that, I think. But I try to empathize, because can you imagine, I remember you said, basically just for anyone listening to this, it is worth you knowing that I, generally speaking, am open-minded. I prefer to live in a world where there's 15 or more right answers to any question. I will never get into a political firefight or a religious firefight. I do sometimes talk about Myers-Briggs like a zealot, because it helped me explain so much at like a formative moment when I was pivoting. And like, again, too much of it, it turns into stereotypes, but too little of it, and you can't see the fucking chessboard of human emotion. And so for me, like when I look at the median person that is at the top of the food chain, let's say like running a hedge fund, or like just the people that are driven to be like the Michael Jordan of finance, like the next Warren Buffett, whoever that would be, including, actually, I detected this in Buffett and especially Charlie Munger. They're NTs, they're intuitive thinkers. And for them, it's kind of like a professorial archetype, where it is about accumulating the kind of knowledge that can get you power. And for that archetype, and obviously there's a pendulum here, but for that archetype, it is actually like the major fear is looking in the mirror and seeing someone looking back at you that is not perceived to be competent by other people, but especially by yourself. And for them, teaching something that they consider to be elementary or rudimentary is like a fate worse than death. One of my smartest friends that I went to uni with, I asked him if he would help me with Fatfish and teach, and he's like, I could never do that. He's like, I don't have the patience for that. And so you need a certain amount of like heart first to even want to have the conversation to begin with, much less to have the patience to like sit with the conversation at great length, and then with person after person after person. That would literally, imagine if your relationship with people was that you didn't particularly like human weakness, and human weakness didn't particularly like you. Like you didn't really understand people. You're more at home with books. And now you're trying to like navigate this emotional quagmire with scared shitless people. That is basically an impossible ask.
Yeah.
And that would result for those people in hell on earth. And so for me, and this is why this has been very fun doing this with you as a very emotionally switched on like entrepreneur, young investor, etc. There is a huge opportunity for NF, intuitive feelers of any gender, of any whatever, but I think especially of men, to be frank, to make an impact here, because I think most people like that tend to find themselves in like the arts, and there is definitely a huge void in terms of creativity and education in the field of finance and financial education that has not been served at all. And importantly, that could not possibly be served archetypally by the existing machine. It doesn't produce the right human capital, and it doesn't attract the right kind of people that they would even want to play. They're looking to get theirs, and then they're looking to be on a golf course and like beating their friends at poker, and that's totally fine. It just leaves a gap of opportunity for somebody else.
Yeah. That's definitely one of the things I notice is like there's this inherent need to compete at like intelligent games across that the archetypes that I was studying. Like, yeah, looking at people that were like talking about focus investing, they're all like hyper focused on getting ahead essentially. But it's not just getting ahead at anything, it's getting ahead at the biggest game, the biggest baller game, I think. And they probably don't think about it in those words, they just probably really enjoy the game.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm thinking of two things. I'm thinking of I'm thinking of the famous story of two authors. I want to say one of them was Kurt Vonnegut. I'm forgetting the second, but they were at some financial big shots party, and they were like, holy crap, he's got this and that yacht and that castle and that whatever. And then the other one was like, yeah, but I have something that person will never have. I was like, what's that? Enough. And that is, at least for them, that's true in the context of these like external power structures, this external apparition of status and authority and genius. Enough. But there's probably some other area where they are like a bottomless pit of like wanting to build. For that kind of archetype, it probably is more like self-understanding and like originality maybe. But in the context of money, yeah, some people are bottomless pits and some people aren't. And I think that you're not going to change human nature, but what you can do is change sort of the fabric or the structure of the educational landscape and the entrepreneurial landscape so that there's more people that aren't like that are playing. And the second thing is I'm remembering when I was in LA, when I was like really, really studying this, I was much more, I was like wild about learning as much about investing as possible. I was 80% invested in Netflix. I was just like throwing myself into focus investing. And I used to talk about it a lot in public. Now my mantra more is like find fat fish, then shut your face, for reasons that I talk about with people. But in terms of your specific picks, but I remember we were at a table of 28-year-olds like having a drink, and the people sitting at the table are more in the artistic archetype than like the scientist, professorial archetype. And I started having the conversation with this one guy that was like a business, he kind of presented himself like the business honcho. And we were talking about it, sort of pitching and catching. And these other people that arguably were the smartest people sitting there, who are like brilliant writers and creatives and creative directors, etc. I remember they were looking at us and they were like, it was first in their reaction, but then in what one of them actually said, he's like, oh, like you guys are having an adult conversation. And I was like, that's fascinating that you're this smart. You make more than you spend. You have decades to do this, but you view us having this conversation as this like unattainable thing for you. And again, that is what winning looks like in investing, is elevating your own self-perception, elevating your own identity so that you feel like you deserve a seat at the table and that you are willing to play. And so like I have noticed, of course, that there is an very understandable but so strongly felt and like emotionally held that it makes them susceptible. There's like a huge thirst for women leadership in investing, and which rightly so, like they want to feel like they have a seat at the table. But the problem is if all you need to do is raise your hand and be like, I'm a woman and I'm wearing this power suit, I have an opinion, like give me money and like trust me. If that's all it takes, then you know, there's such a thirst and there's such an emotionally held identity need that people just run in. To me, that's exactly the same thing as like, I'm a big Wall Street fat cat in the 80s, like give me all your money and trust me. It just creates a different set of lemmings and gerbils that are going to get taken to the cleaners. And so you have to be really careful in filling that identity need, but totally understandable that it's there, and it is absolutely worth celebrating, A, that you feel like you deserve, and B, that you've claimed a seat at the table. But to me, that's one thing I've noticed with a lot of the most emotionally intelligent people, and I have worked with some in the arts. I'm thinking of one who's Auckland based, who said to me, she's like, if I learn how to do this, like, will that make me a dirty capitalist pig? And she might be the most intelligent person who's come through the whole workshop, but she had this huge, like, preemptive defense against learning it that was grounded entirely in sensitivity, and that was threatening to like create a terrible relationship with money. And that is what I see with the median like artist, the median creative, is their EQ is like 200, but is creating self-sabotage. And so, yeah, what winning looks like in investing is questioning assumptions, stopping self-sabotage, and getting yourself into a better relationship with everything that you want and need to function.
Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts on that. I ran into that for myself a lot when I was younger, but I think meeting you was a big pivotal factor in me shifting my attitude. It was very rare that I met someone of wealth who didn't view it as a matter of ego, which actually speaks to the investor archetype lack of ego, that Sugar Sean stoic walking around the ring even though you won, calm, knew it happened, but it's not a part of your personality, you know? It just is what it is. You're playing this game and that's cool. You're going to keep playing, keep winning. But it's not like I'm better than this person, which I think is one of the common emotional factors that's sent from the people that are in established financial systems, even if subtly, which like NFs, you know, the people that are like us, you know, a bit sensitive, can feel intuitively. We intuitively feel that, but we don't like it. And so instead of learning to play that game, we say, oh, no, I don't want to do that.
That's not for me.
Yeah. But I think all it takes is meeting the right person or hearing the right person speak or, you know, maybe learning some stuff. Like
well, and for reasons that we've discussed at length over the last, I think, 10 episodes or so of this, 10 like good, dense, hopefully very useful for people conversations. 95%, it's just like anything else. Again, this is sort of Tony Robbins is famous for saying this. Anything under the sun is probably 80% or more psychology, 20% or less tactics. By that math, and investing, stock picking and investing is probably more 95.5 or 99.1. That favors the emotionally intelligent person. And so what's interesting to me is, we do have these horrible disparities and all this. In my opinion, a huge percentage of the people that are best equipped to actually play the game, play it well, and actually would be then most motivated if they did have oligopolic sums of money to like improve the world. They're on the sidelines. Like, oh, this isn't for me. I'm just going to like read novels. And so like, there's nothing wrong with reading novels, but this game favors the emotionally intelligent. And if they can get out of their own way, which is a huge if. But to me, that's one thing that, that has become very, very clear to me is, well, two things. One is the median nurse is better equipped to invest successfully than the median doctor, because the median nurse probably thrives in action and like taking action and questioning assumptions, where the median doctor might be more like fear-based, academic, etc. And the median poet is better equipped to understand the machinations of the stock market than the median scientist. There's the famous quote, I believe it was Isaac Newton, said something along the lines of, I was able to divine and predict the stars, but not like human illogic in the markets. That's exactly it. The scientific brain, and I think Peter Lynch said this really well verbatim, but the scientific brain is often thwarted here. And counterintuitively, it is sort of the empathic, artistic brain that can thrive. But what percentage of them know that or believe that? And the artist, that's probably one of the archetypes of people. Obviously, the main problem to solve is I work because I have to, not because I want to. I'm scared I'm going to outlive my money. I'm scared I'm going to screw over my family by projecting and passing down these hand-me-downs from hell that get them nowhere, like the immigrant mentality, you have to bleed for money, etc. Those are the main problems to solve. But like the artist who hates the money that they rely on to fund their art and to fund the humanitarian endeavors they want to do, that is definitely a huge, in my opinion, like low-hanging fruit that this can break this open for. And so when we talk about how, like going back to another major theme, this would be winning for society, in my opinion. What does winning look like for investing is that 20% actually of the people have 80% of the money, not 20 people only. Like if that can be people that actually then would elevate the state of play in entertainment, humanitarian action, etc. Like that is what winning would actually really look like.
And it's unfortunate that things are trending the the opposite direction, right?
I mean, I believe that technology is trending in a favorable direction, but somehow because the technological capital gets better as the human capital does not, we have like an omniscience machine that has really opened this up. And yet the average person, the Joey public, is using this to get like dumber and more impulsive rather than more liberated. And to a degree, like I said, I think that the onus is on people that give a shit, that can communicate, to help elevate the state of play. And I think, well, it reminds me a little bit of I think Martin Luther King said it in that those who love peace need to learn to organize and mobilize as effectively as those who love war. And Kurt Vonnegut in A Man Without a Country wrote something along the same lines. It was like a paraphrase where it was like all of this is possible if the angels can learn how to organize like mafiosos sometimes. And so essentially you need more people playing the game and evolving, rather than having it be that so many people are inactive and in a state of too hard pile.
Yeah, I mean, we've covered the actions and the steps that people that feel like they're in the too hard pile should follow in other episodes, or should consider. Would you have anything else to, like, you know, get into the...
But I think it's about psychological shifts. So I'm thinking, like, you know what? Yeah, and talking about preparing your strategy, preparing your identity. The Steve, I can say his last name because he's out there, Steve Wosterval, who illustrates Buckleberry Finn, Fine Fat Fish's mascot, and the art. I worked with him 10 years ago, and then 5 years ago, and now I'm working with him again. So he's gone through the workshop in its different iterations 3 times, and he made big pivots in 2020. And he shared with me during a call on Friday that he had built a big enough position in one of his fat fish that it actually frightened his financial advisor. And that is funny for so many different reasons, but essentially, like, on both an identity and a strategy level, the person who was consulting on this looked at it and their head exploded, but the person who was prepared on an identity and strategy level was kind of like wryly amused. That is actually what is possible. You can build yourself to a point where your performance is frightening people that are typically trying to frighten you. I think that's funny and interesting. I think that shows a reversal, both psychologically and financially, that is meaningful. And I'm thinking of somebody else, a lawyer that I worked with, who said a couple of the best things that I've heard. I remember on 1 or 2 calls in particular, he just kind of lit it up, because he was in like a stressful, frustrated place, pushing senior citizenship. And a couple of weeks in, he goes, I haven't had this much confidence since I was 35, which I think is a great milestone. And then I taught my financial advisor a lot and then fired him.
That's winning.
Hall of Fame for me. And so, like, that's what winning sounds like. But what winning can also sound like is I'm thinking of a pair of dental or orthodontal surgeons on the South Island of New Zealand that I've worked with at different times, who, once they learned how to multiply their own money, went from being like, oh my God, I'm going to be drilling holes in people's teeth until I'm a dead body, to actually, I have enough to retire. And that tramp that my wife and I have been procrastinating since our mid-20s, like, we're going on that right now for 2 months. Like, it can unlock you strategically. It can then unlock your identity to be like, oh my God, I guess I am a retiree.
Yeah.
Like, I have enough. So, like, creativity can be nonlinear. Sometimes strategy unlocks identity. Sometimes identity, like, enables strategy and then momentum, but it can go either way. But in any case, I suppose what does winning look like in investing is just making the decision in the first place that this is a game worth playing. And I think it is worth reminding that this, if you look at the equation for compound interest, and if you don't, refresh yourself with the presentation on my site, compound interest is just how much you invest times how well you invest times how long you invest. Revenue is just a portion of how much you invest, assuming that you have profit left over to invest in the first place. And so investing is what actually drives the bus about retiring early, retiring at all, dying in debt, working your whole life just to squander and piss it away on some bad investments that your drunk uncle talked you into. Like, this is actually the main thing, which is amazing that it's not taught anywhere. It's also amazing that it can be taught well in 8 weeks, as has been proven. And so if you decide that this is a game worth playing, become a 10-year veteran as soon as possible and ask for support until you no longer need the support. In a lot of ways, another form of winning is like accepting support until you no longer need that support. And in the areas where I've struggled to identify those like counterintuitive patterns, and I just found myself kind of ramming into the same mistake over and over and over. It is a big win, just to stop slamming your face into the wall, and then like ask assumptions, ask for a bit of support, and then one way or another get around, or bulldoze through the wall with somebody else's help. And to me, that's really all it comes down to.
Yeah, asking for help. Yeah, I just recently rewatched this like 1.5 minute clip of Steve Jobs talking about the importance of asking for help. And one of the things that I've found, at least with entrepreneurship, definitely with investing, like I've had a lot of conversations actually in the barbershop about investing. Anytime you ask anyone for help or ask anyone for information, it's very rare if you come to them with good energy and like show up with openness and eagerness to learn, that people are just going to be like, talking down on you or anything like that. So if you're looking to get started investing, ask for help. So important. Yeah.
Ask for help.
Yeah.
And be both patient about solving the problem, but impatient about getting that like conviction and clarity and knowing that you're on the right track as soon as you can. And as long as you can carry those two things, I think it's fair to say that success is likely.
Yeah, for sure. Is there anything else that comes to mind when you think about what winning looks like?
I would say the most important thing for most people is knowing that you're going to be able to step off of the revenue ladder under your own power on a time horizon that makes sense, or even better, knowing that you actually don't want to. You don't want to ever be like totally, fully, all the way sort of like sedentary in that way, but that you can downshift work as soon as possible to an actual proportion that your like income, lifestyle, and contribution balance makes sense for you. And so, a common ambition of people that I've spoken to in New Zealand, actually, it's been heavy, is wanting to get to a 4-day work week as soon as possible. Some people 3-day, some people sort of like a permanent 4-day weekend for the rest of your life. And just having it be that like quote unquote semi-retirement. So if for some reason you're feeling scarce or bored or dormant or like decaying, you have this really fun intellectual stimulant and financial stimulant being investing. But you can also like step back into work rejuvenated because you have a better place to put that money. And I am thinking about a mailman and a special education teacher that I worked with in 2018, Kevin and Missy, who mid-50s, San Francisco, super expensive, and I'll never forget, they were amongst the most trepidatious people I've ever worked with coming in. Like their identity was not, they were used to like delivering mail or teaching the children of people that were investors, not investors themselves. And I will never forget that Kevin posted in like a group chat. He just kind of like jammed. This is kind of like him doing like a reverse dunk, but he just goes Roku, because Roku for them was like a pretty fast, I think, 9-bagger within a couple of years, and they fed more money into it. And then the two of them started a a side hustle that continues and evolves to this day to make more money to better feed the fat fish. And then other people have, like I said, created businesses or gone after promotions or taken an interest in actually educating their kids so that, and setting themselves up on like a multi-generational level. But whatever it is, what winning looks like is, I call it the Roku effect in honor of Kevin, where essentially it is a renewed vigor and energy towards life and towards seeing things through, because you actually now have confidence, you have clarity about where you want to go, and you have confidence that you independently can bring yourself and your people to that place. And to me, that's ultimately the most important thing, because money, like I said, like, don't forget to define what this is really about. Money is just like an opinion. It's just like this opinion that we have. And so it's not about the money. It's not about $1 million. It's not about any of that. It's just means to the end of what it is that you actually want. And what everyone wants is purpose and contribution and solid confidence and momentum. And so when it results in short, like positive energy, there's nobody, you'd have to be the biggest masochist on the planet to not want positive energy. If this is resulting in a continuous burst of positive energy for you that's life affirming, then that is what winning looks like at its highest form, I would say.